everybody. Welcome to the Man's World podcast. Welcome back, I guess, everybody. We've been gone for a little while, but we're going to pick up right where we left off. Just to let everybody know, I'm going to post some stuff in the chat as we usually do. We have an anonymous contact sheet where you can submit questions if you don't want to be known, or you can submit the questions in the chat as well. And our shows are going to be a little bit quicker. We're going to move along pretty fast paced. But if you have any questions, submit them and we'll try to answer them no matter what. And if we don't get them to this show, we'll try to get them on the next show. So just to pick up where we left off, we're going to finish up our series on how to extricate, escape a bad marriage. When it's time to pull the plug, it's not going to work, and how to get out of a situation without going too much in the negative. And Mubarak's going to start you off there. I'm going to put some stuff in the chat. Again, if we want engagement. We want you guys to ask questions. We want to be a help to you guys. So in order to do that, we need you guys to communicate with us. So submit your questions, either the chat or submit them via the survey.
And yeah, just real quick. And so what we're trying to get at is perhaps it may not necessarily be a bad marriage, but it could be a marriage that is not working for one or both people. And I guess that would be a bad marriage, but it may not be necessarily bad, but it's not going to actually help you to get to your goals. So I can hear some people now, well, it might not be a bad marriage. Okay, let's just say a marriage that's not working. It might be a bad one, but it also might be one that's not really going in the direction that you need it to go. So just to recap, we're going to recap kind of what we went over in part one and part two, and then we'll kind of pick up where we need to be for part three. So in part one, we covered several things. The number one thing, and this is for men and women, basically, you need to protect, basically for men, you need to protect your seed, your sperm. You need to make sure that if you're in a relationship that is not going to be progress, it's not going to be, you're not going to be able to meet the goals that you need for the relationship, the benefits that you need out of it are not there. And also for the woman, then you need to make sure that you're not bringing any more children into that relationship through you two. So you need to do whatever you need to do to avoid that. We went into detail about some of the things you can do. If you want to know, you can go back to 2 episodes back and kind of look at some of the things that you can do to avoid that. But basically, birth control of different types. You need to also make sure that the finances that you have that are tied together, that you need to make sure to unravel that in a way that's not going to harm you before ending the relationship. If you're too quick in unraveling some of the financial entanglements that you might have, you might wind up losing a significant amount or all of your wealth that you have tied up together because you move too quickly. If you have rental properties, you need to make sure that you can safely extricate yourself from extricate yourself from that property, especially if it's in your name and the person who you may be deciding that you're not wanting to be in a relationship anymore, they may be living there. If they're on the lease, they could do some damage to the property. You will be on the hook. So these are things that you have to think about. If you're renting a property, documentation, birth certificates, social security cards, passports, anything. There was one young lady who she was upset with her significant other. So what did she do? She destroyed his passport, and they were outside of the country. So he was actually stuck outside the country. So these are things that you have to think about before. Make sure you secure these documentations before you spout off and say, "Well, I'm leaving," or pronounce a talaq or anything like that. So it's passwords to your bank accounts, your social media, anything that's important. Your email. A person with access to your email could ruin your life with several things. So these are things that you have to look at. You have to expect and prepare for child support. If a person is, especially if they're vindictive, if they're hurt, if you know that they will not leave quietly, then you probably can expect them to try to use the full extent of the law if it's going to be on their side to get as much child support from you. It's not necessarily for the child, it's just to hurt you. So,
Yep.
and men and women can do this, but a lot of times it is the women. That's just the facts of the matter.
Yep.
So you have to expect and prepare for this. It may take years, actually, to prepare yourself financially, or for the situation, so that you can mitigate some of the harms that will come with a vindictive person who wants to harm you by means of the family courts and the child support system.
Yep.
And so that kind of was the first show I think that we did regarding that. That was kind of like the Cliff Notes version of what we covered. So anything you want to jump in there with, sir?
Yeah, real quick, and it just popped in my head when we were talking about protecting your lineage, protecting your sperm or whatever. And this goes to men and women. And I've heard this bad advice too many times to account, where, especially for like older generations, I believe. Well, actually, no, it's not limited to the older generations, but where you may go to your friends or family to seek advice, like, listen, this marriage isn't working. I need to end it or whatever. And it's always everybody's natural, and it should be their natural inclination to give you advice to try to save the marriage, right? That should be like everybody's natural inclination. But you'll hear this advice where they'll be like, well, have a kid, that'll fix things. It may be a temporary fix, it may mask things, but in most situations that I've seen from people that actually have tried that advice, all it did was put them in a worse situation. That's all it did. And again, you got to think about not only yourself, but think about the kids that you're actually bringing into that negative situation.
Yeah, absolutely. I've never seen it. I've seen it actually keep people together, but it didn't improve the relationship.
Yes, that's a perfect way to say it. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So that was kind of like a few points that we went over several hours in the last few shows that we went over. But as far as these points, like specifically for women, I think that's where we left off at, and that's kind of where we were jumping in at. Now, as far as protecting the your lineage, or preventing having any children once you realize that this relationship is not going to work, I think it's easier for women. I'm assuming it's easier for women to decide to make that decision. They can pretty discreetly take a birth control pill or Plan B, or there's several things they could do. They also can they have the ability to kind of manipulate the situation. For married people, I think you can figure it out to where you kind of keep yourself out of the danger zone. So for women, that's easy. Now, the issue may be is it ethical? Is it ethical? So I would say to tell a significant other, or to secretly prevent conception with your significant other, and they're clueless about it, or especially if they are wanting to have children, I think that would definitely be unethical. I think it depends on the situation. If it's a toxic situation, if it possibly could become violent or physical or something like that. If you because once you express your desire to prevent any children, that's a clear indication.
Yeah,
I think that you may be the issue, or the other party. So it's a case by case basis. But if it's a situation where, as the woman, that you're not going to stay in this marriage, you're going to do everything that you can do to get out of it. And especially you should consult with your father, or those people who are in authority over you, about the best course of action. But once you get to that point, then, though it may be unethical on its surface, but it's actually better for the other individual. It's better for that man in the long run when you're not going to be together. It's going to actually be harder on him, even though at the time you may say, well, this is kind of shady for you to, he's working away thinking that he may have a child, and it's nothing happening. So I would say you have to look at a case by case basis. But once if you yourself are solidly in the in the camp of I do not want to continue this relationship, then yeah, you should shut it down. You
Yeah.
should do anything you can do to prevent that, and Allah knows best.
And women, you're in a especially delicate situation because while you're trying to set yourself, I would say it's actually easier for women to kind of take the steps needed to prepare themselves to leave than it is for men in most cases. But you're in a situation where, like, especially if you're a Muslim wife, that you have to hear and obey your husband. You have to still be obedient. You still have to be a good wife, and this goes for husbands too. Still have to be a good husband and give people give your spouse their Islamic rights, because you're going to be held accountable for that while you're actually still married to the person. So, as Mubarak said, it's you have to look at the whole picture. You may have to come up with some real unique, strategic ways to fulfill some of these steps to protect yourself. And then I think, don't miss the point that Mubarak made, that you're not only protecting yourself, you're actually protecting the other person as well. They may not know it, they may not realize it. It may be, a bitter pill to swallow for some of the steps that you have to take, but you are protecting both each other. And like we mentioned this before on the show, where we talked about the things to do prior to even getting married. And it may seem like, we talked about as far as, like, having prenuptial agreements, not getting legally married, and all these different things. And it may on the surface come off as we're trying to just, like, okay, men, protect your money, protect your bag. No, especially Islamically, you're protecting yourself, your rights, but you're also protecting the other person from transgressing upon you, right? You're protecting them. And at the end of the day, when we all stand before Allah, if you do this right, that person will be thanking you. Like, I'm so thankful you protected me from transgressing and committing these types of sins, because this is what it actually leads to. And the biggest way, especially we're talking to our Muslim husband and wives, especially the dangers for the wives, because like Mubarak said, it's usually the wives that are the women that get caught up in this. They actually, a lot of women take themselves outside of the fold of Islam as a result of, not saying it's the husband's fault, but for maybe a man not taking the right steps, the proper steps to protect himself and protect her from committing those sins.
Yeah. So, and I mean, and that ties right into the next point. And this is like for the things that are specific to women. Is that, and it's not only, but this is like women have to do this, and that is, will your father or your family back your decision? So if you have come to the conclusion, I am not going to stay in this relationship, and no woman is forced to, contrary to popular opinion, well, a woman is not forced to stay in a relationship. She can leave for any reason that she wants. Now, the problem lies is if she leaves a relationship for a reason that's not valid, she will then open herself up to a major punishment from Allah. She will not be able to enter Jannah if she just abandons the marriage for no good reason. And that's between her and Allah. But the issue comes in when she wants to leave a marriage. Her father, her wali, her guardian, someone has to actually help her to exit that marriage. The husband can do it by divorcing her, and then she can exit. Or her father or wali, her guardian, would then say, hey, she tells him, hey, I want to get out. And then he would have to okay it. He would say, okay, yeah, all right. And then you give back the mahar, and then you go back under the guardianship of your father or whoever is your guardian after that. But a woman is not able to just unilaterally just say, I'm leaving the marriage, and just tell her husband, I'm giving you your money back. I'm giving you your mahar back. She gives him his 50K and walks away. That's actually not how it goes. So what happens is, if a woman decides, I'm not staying in this marriage, and she just bolts, she just leaves and decides, I'm not gonna stick around. The whole time when she is outside of her husband's home or disobeying him or whatever she's doing, if she's still married, then she opens herself up to being in a major transgression as a Muslim. Now, if we're talking about
Mhm.
Muslims, it's a major transgression. So your salah may not be being accepted. Your fasting and your sadaqah, whatever you might be doing, is not being accepted because you're literally in a state of major disobedience because Allah has made the men uh, um, maintainers and providers and authority over their women and over their wives. So
Mhm.
this is a disobedience to what Allah has said. So if you don't have the backing of your guardian before you decide to do something, then you're going to wind up in limbo. Because the thing is, it may be a situation, and most of the time, this is a situation. The woman says, I'm out. She has to give the man his money back. But in reality, it's her father who's going to have to pay him because she's already spent the money.
Yeah.
She's already spent the money. So it's a situation where if she says, I'm going to leave, the husband says, okay, give me my 50K back. Give me my $50,000. And all right, whatever.
Yeah.
She says, well, I don't have it. Well, I paid you cash. You're going to pay me cash. Give me my money. Otherwise, go ahead and finish dinner or
Yeah.
whatever she may be doing.
Right.
Now, if she can't do it and the father says, listen, I'm not paying that. You got in this relationship, you're going to have to stick it out. Then she's going to have to find a valid reason, an Islamically valid reason to nullify it. That means he transgressed, he committed some sort of crime or somewhere where he breached the contract, and then it can be nullified. But that has to be done by a scholar or a sheikh or someone who's
Yeah.
knowledgeable, and they can actually make the determination. And if it's wrong, then the weight of it is on him. It's not on the woman. It's not on the husband. It would be on that sheikh or whoever who looked at the situation and said, yeah, he is wrong. And so it's been happened many times where people have thought, well, I can nullify this. And then they go and they figure out that the sheikh actually tells them, you have nothing here. Your husband didn't do anything wrong. You need to go back to your husband or give him his money and go about your way. So they wind up in limbo. They're somewhere random, just piling up sins. They're praying, but it may not be accepted. They're fasting, but it may not be accepted. And they're sitting there. They haven't paid the husband his money, and they're disobeying their husband. So they're just in a world of hurt. So before you decide to make a move or even open your mouth and tell your husband, I want khula, first, before that, you say, hey, talk to your guardian, talk to your wali, okay, this is what I want to do. These are the reasons why, XYZ. Maybe he should already know. And you say, okay, listen, I'll talk to him. I'll make sure that it's something that I can do. I don't have $50,000 right now. So maybe we can set up a payment plan. Maybe we can try to get him to, whatever you might do. But if you don't have the backing of whoever's going to finance it, that's number one. And whoever's in going to agree, because your father, and it's happened before where a father said, no, you don't need to leave this person. You don't need to leave this husband. You need to actually stay with him because he's actually good for you. Even though you might not like what's going on, I agree with him. So that happens too. So before you get ahead of yourself and say, I'm getting out of here, your guardian or your father might say, no, you're wrong. Your husband's right. And you need to actually stay in a relationship. So that's something that you really have to consider before making a move like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And here's the thing: when you follow these steps, it's also a safeguard. We're going to talk about this in a little bit when we talk about like what do you do if you're unsure. But like Mubarak said, when you're actually going to your wali or your guardian and bringing this stuff up, because what happens typically? What do we see? What happens typically? Woman wants a divorce, and even she probably knows that she doesn't have a real valid reason, right? And she doesn't go to her wali, she doesn't go to her parents, she doesn't do any of that. She goes and imam shops, right? Goes to this masjid, that masjid, and finally finds somebody, a femi mom or somebody that's going to agree with what she says and basically issue a divorce. You don't want to do that, right? And when you go through the steps of like one, you first contact your wali, your father, your older brother, or whatever it is, and tell them I want a divorce. Are you going to help me get out of this situation? You tell them the situation. Right there, they might say, "Hey, daughter, sister, whatever, you're tripping right now. You don't have a valid reason. This is something that is not you should not be getting a divorce for." They might be able to say, "Hey, if you do this, this is the situation you're going to be able, they'll actually maybe give you some real perspective." Okay, say they agree with you. Then the next step is that they're going to actually go talk to your husband and be able to get the other side of the story. And you have basically it's a checks and balance systems that you can go through to actually protect yourself from basically engaging in a sensitive situation, because you have the hadith that if a woman that asks for a a divorce without any right or any reason is that you're not even going to smell paradise. That means that you're never going to be there. You're never going to get into paradise. That's a very big threat that we should really think about. And another thing is when when a woman goes to her husband and says, "Okay, I want a kula," right? Remember, your perspective of your marriage is your own perspective. It might, in your eyes, it might be the worst situation. I just can't take it anymore. It's so bad, it's so horrible. And you go to your husband, he's like, I'm cool. Like everything's fine with me. So when you go and you're thinking like, oh, this is so bad, I'm so depressed, it's so horrible, and I need out, and this marriage is so trash, and whatever you're saying, right? And a lot of women do this, and they think that, like, he's like, yeah, this marriage is bad, we should just part ways. And you're saying, okay, I don't want to pay anything. The husband's like, well, no, I want what I invested in this back, or some portion of it or something. Otherwise, I'm cool. I'm happy with you doing whatever you're doing, because hopefully you're still being a good wife and giving him his rights and all that. And maybe all the stuff that you're concerned about, he's not really so concerned about. So just think about that when you actually take these steps.
Yeah, so I mean, in the next thing, it really ties in. All this thing is like, all these things tie in together and they overlap a little. But like the next thing is, after, like, can you repay the mahar? Okay, we kind of covered that. But do you have anywhere to go? Now, this is tricky. This is very tricky. Do you actually have somewhere to go if your husband is no longer your husband, because you're living with him most of the time?
Yeah.
And hold up. Now, you could be in a situation where he's living with you. But what if he doesn't leave?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So you have a situation. Maybe both your names are on the lease. Maybe you bought it together, or maybe you sign an agreement with him, or you're in agreement that he can stay there. Or if he's been living there, I mean, he actually has some rights to be there, just as far as legally, like in the States. Now, there's people who like squatters' rights and things like that. So you could get in a situation where, oh, I want a divorce, I want a khula or whatever, but he's still living in your den.
Yep.
And he says, I'm not going anywhere. So you have to look at that also. Will you be able to actually get away from him, one? And two, do you have a place that you can go that will be comfortable? Because it may be a situation where, just like for how we advise the men, you may have to plan your extraction for years. It could take years for you to unravel everything. So for the woman, if hey, I got to get out of here, but where am I going to go? Can I go back to my father's house? My father's not in the country, or my father is not Muslim, or my father says, don't come here. Yeah. Or, my brothers or whoever is like, I don't have anywhere to go. Or my credit's not good enough to go and get another apartment, or I don't actually physically have a place or a friend or anybody that's going to say, hey, you can stay and live here for as long as whatever. Maybe you don't have a job. So it's like, and sometimes women do this. Well, girl, you can stay with me. Come on, until, you really got to stay there. And then they're like, hey, you got to go. And so you wind up in a situation where then you get in a situation of desperation, because you actually don't have anywhere to go. And as much as you didn't like, Fulan or your husband or whatever, now you got to pay to eat. You got to pay to somewhere to sleep. You got to pay, for transportation. You can't just ride around his car no more. So all these little things that you're not going to have access to, it's like, I've heard stories where, women, they all of a sudden think that everything that they had access to, from their husband, when they think they still got, let me use your car. Let me, get this for me. Or, my sink is leaking or whatever. Everything is like, no, all that stuff is cut off. So you have to look at that. That wraps into, do you have a place to go? Your situation, do you have a landing spot? Do you have a golden parachute set up? And a lot of women, they don't have it, and they wind up actually jumping into another marriage, another relationship fairly quickly, just because they will nearly be homeless.
Yeah.
In a situation where they really cannot take care of themselves, or sometimes their child. A lot of women, they may come into the relationship with the stepchild, bringing, and then He just
Yep.
says, if your mama's gone, you're going with your mama. So even those stepkids that he was taking care of, he cut them off too.
Yep.
So
Or
it
even
happens.
or even your mutual kids. Maybe you got some young kids, and
Hmm.
as a right, as a mother, especially Islamically, you have the right to raise young children. Is your girlfriend or your sister, your family member, going to let you move in with your 2 or 3 kids? And how long is that going to last? And that part you mentioned about, like, and men do it as well, but not so much as women. But thinking that everything's going to remain the same except the parts they don't want. So, like, you mentioned about, like, come fix the sink or whatever. Like, I'm sure every man has a situation like where their ex, they're the ones that wanted to leave. They sought the divorce. They went on their way, and then they come back asking for stuff that was like, no, only my wife gets that treatment. You know what I mean? Like, why am I like, just think about it, especially for those that are involved in polygyny or whatever. Imagine just women. Imagine you're married, right? And your husband says, "Oh, I'm going over to sister's house to go fix her sink or go pump up her tires." You're going to be like, "No, you're not. Tell her to call her brother, tell her to call her father, tell her to call whoever, tell her to call AAA, whatever it is." But now that you're divorced, you think you still have that same access. You have to really think about all this, because all your relationships are going to change, even down to the fact of some of the relationships with your friends will change. Sister so and so that used to always invite you over for tea and chats and parties and play dates, you're a single woman now. I don't know how many women are going to say, "You are not allowed at my house anymore because I have a husband and you don't. And you're going to try to steal my husband. You can't come over here anymore." You have to think about all these things that are going to happen in your new life.
Yeah, that's that. I mean, there's so many. There's a lot more. I feel like moving parts to the woman's situation. I mean, both
Mm-hmm.
are very important, and there's some details I'm pretty sure that people can probably jump in and say and add to what we're saying. I mean, this is kind of
Yep.
like it's a blueprint, but there's also other things that can plug into it. The point is, you really have to think it through. Once you
Yep.
come to the decision in your mind, hey, it's time to go. I'm not going to be able to do this. These are the steps you need to take, and you need to walk through all of them and make sure, like the last one here is an emergency or a getaway fund. So basically, the last thing you need to have in place already, you need to have it in place already, especially if you're a woman. And if you're not working, or if you are working but you're not the one who's houses in your name, or the cars or whatever it might be, before you say, hey, I want a khula, you should have that emergency fund, getaway fund ready, where if he says, yes, okay, pay me XYZ money, and they agree, your father, whatever, says, yeah, all right, he cash apps him the $50 he paid you for the motor, and then you have to leave immediately
Mm-hmm.
out. Okay, where are you going to go? Your dad says, yeah, I cash after the $50, but you can't come here. My
Mm-hmm.
wife don't really like you like that. They don't vibe like that. I'm not trying to have my house turned upside down. Now what? So you have to have where you're going to go now, okay, set up, how you're going to feed yourself, because he doesn't have to feed you anymore, and you have to have your transportation, whether, whatever you use, all that has to be mapped out and laid out, at least for a significant amount of time, to where you can then, get back there. I would say at least 3 months.
Yeah.
Probably should have 6 months, but at least three, to where, all right, in 3 months, I know that I could have some place to stay. I can feed myself. I can get back and forth to work, or I can, have enough money to get me over until I get a job, whatever it may be. If you don't do that, then you're asking for trouble. You're asking for trouble. Now, if you can just go back to your father's house and be like, okay, daddy, I'm back, or whatever, and he's like, all right, come on, then then that's your emergency fund. That's your getaway fund. But if not, you got to think all these things through. So push come to shove, you might have to just stick it out for a year or two, or however long it takes you to be set up to where then you can thrive afterwards.
Yeah. And this is a little bit of advice that's kind of off topic, but it's more about the decision making when before you get up to this point. Um, but you really have to consider all these factors, and we could really drive down to all these different things that you got to consider, especially from the woman's perspective of the new life you're getting into, and what stage of your life are you in, the pluses and negatives, the consequences, and because there's just so many single women that are out there that they made a decision, and from their perspective in their marriage at that point in time, it was like they couldn't be in it, they needed a divorce, and they just basically, what do they say, jump from the frying pan into the kettle, or whatever it is saying, is like they are into the fire, really, because they just get into a worse situation. And you really have to think these things through. And I think the general theme for all the content that we've been putting out there is you have to think, you have to plan, you really have to consider. And it's very important, brothers especially, you have to have a good network of people around you, people that have life experiences, people that have thought about these things. And I can't tell you the amount of things, I think we've all said it on this show, of just by having these conversations, so many different things pop up in our minds, like, wow, I never even thought of that. And if I had thought of that 5 years ago, 10 years ago, whatever, I'd be in a whole different space right now in my life. So just really, really think, consult, talk about it, and then really make decisive moves that are going to benefit you, in the short term and the long term.
So, a couple questions here, and I'll just pose them to you. What if you are unsure? What if you're unsure if, we said, well, if you know that the marriage is bad, or that the marriage is not going to work, or the person is not going to work for the reasons why you got married. What if you are unsure? Then what should a person do?
So I'm gonna go back to a lot of the advice that we've been given up to this point, and I'm gonna say that based off what we've been telling people, I think the first step to do is, if you're unsure, is to go talk to your network, the close people, right? But I think you have to know who you're talking to, because we have various people in our network, right? And if we can, maybe we should do a show on this, like we classify people in our network, because there's certain people in our network that are strictly for entertainment, right? I'm not listening to you for any type of advice. I just get the tea from you, and it kind of entertains me, and that's pretty much it, or whatever it is, right? Do not give your situation, do not consult with these types of people, right? It might even be somebody that you necessarily don't actually like, or don't like talking to, that you actually need to go tell them. Because here's the thing. People don't like hearing what they don't want to hear or what they don't want to do. But if you're unsure, you want to get certainty in the situation, right? So you have to talk to the people that are willing to tell you stuff that you actually don't want to hear. Those are the people you want to talk to. And I would say the last thing I would say is get advice from people that are from different types of backgrounds, or have different perspectives on things, right? Because they'll be able to give you different views, and you'll be able to make kind of put them together, see where they align. Because if you're really off the line, like if you're really going rogue, even people that have different perspectives, right? The simp, the red pill guy, and all the people in between, you'll see that certain things they say are lining up, and you're like, okay, wait a minute, there might be something here, because all these different people are saying the same thing,
Yeah. I would say that if you're unsure, then start working on the list. Start working on the list that we've provided, because if you got like, listen, there's certain things where you listen. Some people, they're a slam dunk. You're like, hey, listen, this is going to last forever. But if you get to the point where, man, I ain't sure if I'm going to stick around with this guy, start working on the list. If you get to that point where you're like, I don't know if I can deal with this one. I don't know if I can make it happen. Because the list is not a divorce. And for the woman, you started working on these things, to insulate yourself, to extricate yourself. It's not a talaq, it's not anything like that, but it's just things that you're doing to protect yourself. Now, if something else comes about where, man, I was unsure, but man, I was wrong. All right, cool. Then you
Yeah.
be all right. So that kind of goes to the next thing. What do you do? What if you change your mind? What do you do if you've done all this here, and then you change your mind? If you've insulated yourself in all these different financial ways and passwords and all this stuff, you got your getaway fund, you go to parachute, but you like, what? Now, I actually like this guy. I actually like this girl.
Yeah.
Actually, I think actually they are better than I thought. Then what do you do?
So going along with what you just said, that's a very good perspective to have, because if you're working on this list, and I mean, we might even take a step further, is that even if things are going well, start working on this list, because at any point you could pivot this list to something else, right? You've been saving up a getaway fund, like, yeah, this is just in case something happens to you, husband, or this is or for husbands, they can say, yeah, this is for our kids, or say, whatever you want to see. You could pivot all these different things to that if you do actually have a very successful relationship or a very successful marriage that you don't want to extricate yourself from. This is still a benefit to you and your family. You having spare money, you having finances that you can access freely without anybody's intervention or need, right? Say my mother passed away last year. We were all trying to like figure out, because no one had access to her bank accounts,
Mm.
and we still
Wow.
actually don't have access to her bank accounts. We have to go get a lawyer, probate lawyer, do all these different things. It's going on a year now, and that could be a husband and wife situation, right? We're like, okay, he put money in the bank for us, but I don't know how to access it. The password expired, because you may have like online access, but passwords expire. You need to reset them. You need to be the user and all, whatever may happen. Something may happen where you actually aren't in a secure position. All these things provide security and benefit to you, your husband, your children, and so on and so forth.
Okay. So what if, hey honey, I just realized I thought we were banking with ABC Bank, but I just saw that you have a completely different bank account with XYZ Bank. I had no idea. And I mean, you actually have a whole separate little a siloed situation over here. What do you do if you actually get caught with your extraction plans in
Well,
place? You know?
here's what you say. So you can simply, based off of what we've just been saying, you could tell them the actual truth. Or if you
Mm.
don't consider it the truth, you could tell white lies, right? To save the marriage. But you could say, oh, whatever good reason, I'm doing that for us. I'm doing that for us, and come up with a little white lie that
So
can.
you got a separate bank account that I don't know anything about. You looks like you got a half 6 months worth of salary in that joint, and you did it for us.
Hey, yeah, this we gotta start working it. I mean, me personally, like, at that point, it depends on who you are and who you're actually married to, because depending on your situation, that might get you, like, if you're married to an abusive husband or abusive wife, that could turn into a physical altercation, right? So, excuse me. So it's a situation by situation, right? You got to play it by ear. And at some point, depending on who you're married to and what your situation is, it might be best just to be right up front with
Yeah.
what's going on, right? And it might force that conversation that you guys actually need to have, So I wouldn't be able to say specifically as like I don't have any general advice. I'm pretty sure you got something that will help us out generally, but like specifically, you're gonna have to consult with somebody. I believe that's like, well, what do I do? They
Yeah,
found
I
the bank
mean,
statement.
yeah, I mean that is especially if you are planning this because you know that person is going to be toxic, they're probably going to blow up, they might, cause you some issues. Then, I mean, it's a situation where just make dua to Allah that you are either pretty far down the list or you have completed your extraction plans and you can actually hit the eject button. Otherwise, well, depending on the person, you're going to have a battle on your hands. But if it's a situation where you get caught with the extraction plan and you're unsure, or maybe you changed your mind or something like that, then that might be more difficult because there's an element of trust there that's completely broken, and it'll be hard to it's not impossible, but it would take some work to rebuild that trust.
Yeah.
I remember one of my teachers saying one time that you know, if a marriage doesn't have any trust, then it should end. Um, and when he said it, I was like, I don't know about that. I just don't
Yeah.
trust everybody. But now I see it very clearly. It really, a marriage really, you have to have trust. And
Yeah.
so, even with this extraction plan, it's because you don't necessarily trust the person to do the right thing, um, in terms of letting you have the finances that are actually yours. Not trying to take half your house from you and these different things. So you have to extract. But if there's a person in a situation, a family, or in a environment, or maybe in a country that you can trust that you're not going to be harmed, like, you're not going to be in a situation where you're going to be paying 70% or something of your net salary to someone because they have 4 or 5 kids, and maybe they shouldn't even have them. So it's a situation where, if you get caught, but you're definitely getting out, then hit the make a run for it.
Yeah, and then I would even say going back to especially people that aren't married, is this is stuff that you can actually cover in your marital agreement, especially from the woman's side. You can ask for your mahar, right? You can also ask for like I need a fund for that if case we get like it's basically like a prenuptial agreement. Like you see people work this stuff into even their non-Muslim prenuptial agreements where they take their alimony or maintenance or whatever you want to call it in advance just in case something happens. So like, and that's a good time to have these conversations and to get things set up because it's at that time where everybody's just thinking the best of one another, right? We're like, okay, either like as a husband, say if you're a wife, you're getting married or a woman getting married, and you say to your future husband, I want a fund that I can have just to myself, just in case something happens with our marriage and I need to, be on my own or whatever. Or acts, or even a husband asks me, I'm going to have our finances separated. This is just going to be known. I feel more comfortable that way. I could create a separate shared bank account or whatever it is. You could set up some of these steps even before you get married. That way, it's never a secret it's never an issue if something comes up. Like, no, we talked about this before we got married. It shouldn't be an issue, you know?
Absolutely, absolutely. Alhamdulillah, it's important things to think about. Yeah, and it's not easy. It's not something that's easy. So as we said, you should think it through. The last thing I'll just say is that, and you know it's actually extremely important, and that is, the children. You have to really think about that. As far as, if you do have children, you have to really think through the situation that you're going to be in. Now, this is for people who are actually going to be, following the rules of Islam. Right?
Yeah.
So for the father, you have to realize, once you say, "Hey, listen, I'm not staying with this lady anymore. I'm going to get rid of her," and you decide that you're going to divorce her, that she, the children who are young, she's gonna have them, and your time with them is going to be significantly affected, significantly, and that's just straight. If everything is just normal instead of every day, it's going to be, during the times when you're actually free to deal with them or get them, or you may not even, a lot of times you may not have the time or to actually go get them, whatever. So these are things you have to think about. And for the woman, it's like, I don't think they ever really think this through. It's like how much, um, help they actually get from the father in dealing with the children. And they're like, "Oh, I'm doing this all on my own." Well, I mean, that's one of the things that you would have to do. So a lot of that discipline and some of the things that, comes easy for the man, the woman doesn't have access to that. And then when you think about, that woman thinks about, okay, I'm going to get married again. I mean, I don't like this husband that I have, so therefore I'm going to get one that I do like. Those children, go back to him. So it's a thing where the women who actually fear Allah and they know, I'm going to have to give up my children, they wind up in such a conflicted space where it's like, I love my children and I don't want to not be with my children.
Hmm.
But you can't pay your bills and you can't actually and you're working overtime and double time because now you have to take care of yourself. So these are things that you really have to think of. I'm actually going to wind up in a situation where it's a catch-22. You actually have to choose between the husband of your dreams or your children every day. So this is something that you should also think of too. It goes for the man and the woman, but this is general advice for everyone. There's things that are more specific, more detailed. But the moral of the story is, please think everything through, plan everything out, and be careful because making mistakes here could have effects for decades, if not a whole lifetime.
Yeah. And as you said, not only just your lifetime, the children's lifetime, because you're passing certain things on to the next generation of how they should handle their marriages, how they should be in relationships, what they should value, how to behave in certain situations. And that's my big thing out of all this is when you talk about divorce and just living through it, the effects that it has on the children, the extreme negative effects on your children. You literally watch your children like suffering, deteriorating, and there's really nothing you could do about it because there's one bad individual in the situation that is transgressing and violating and committing transgressions against you and your children and ultimately themselves. So it's a very sad situation. There's a question from the chat, and it says a woman can't proposition a divorce without paying mahar, money, to her husband. So I guess they're asking is, does a woman have to pay money to her husband to get a divorce? Like, can she get a divorce any other way?
So the man pays to get in the marriage, and the woman has to pay to get out of it. Just in general, that's kind of like a rule that you could go by, right? So to get married, the man is expected to pay a mahar. He's expected to, if she requests, hey, I want XYZ for a mahar, maybe she just says, okay, I want $25,000. If that's the price that she wants, the man is, if he wants to actually uh, execute the marriage contract, he has to pay it or pay it within the terms that are specified in the contract. So if you're going to pay me $5,000 on the wedding day, and then you're going to pay $5,000 a month for the next 4 months after that to make the 25,000. Okay, that's what the man would have to do to get into the marriage. Okay, they're married. Now, for that woman, if the man has not transgressed in some sort of way that has nullified his right to remain married to her. For instance, if he has left Islam, or if he is assaulting her, beating her, doing something that's harming her, that's not letting her actually to function as a reasonable wife in the marriage, then if he hasn't done anything like that, then if she decides, I don't want to be married anymore, the standard is she gives him back his money, 25,000. Now, the situation also compounds if he has also done certain things and made investments in how he has to maintain and provide for her. Maybe he says, I have to get you an apartment. So that apartment says you have to pay 3 months in advance and you can't break the lease. Otherwise, it's going to be a 2-month penalty. So he might have to pay 5 months worth of rent. Maybe he's renting for $2,000 a month. He might have to pay $10,000 on top of that. And because she left, he's on the hook for 10. He says, no, okay, you're going to leave prematurely. I want my 25,000, and the 10,000 that I had to pay for the place for you to stay, you're going to need to pay for that. So he can request things like that he is doing, or that because of her decision is causing him some sort of loss. Now that could also be in the situation. So it may be a thing where I've heard even some shuyukh say the man can actually request anything he wants from the woman if she is going to leave without some sort of wrongdoing on his part. So if he says, hey, I want $1 million, he could do it. Mm-hmm. Now Allah says in Surah Al-Baqarah, He says, وَإِن تَعْفُوا أَقْرَبُ لِلتَّقْوَى. So it's better for you to overlook these things on both sides, right? If the man does not take the mahar back, or the woman, overlooks some mahar that's owed to her or something like that, it's better, if they can do it. But you don't have to. You don't have to, actually. So in short, yes, the woman would have to pay back what the husband gave her, okay, as far as the mahar. But if he says, listen, I know it was 25 years ago, I gave you $25,000. just give me $500. You know what I mean? Or give me that car back that I gave you. Then we're good. Give me the car back, and we'll take your name off the house or whatever, or you signed your portion of the house over to me, and you can go, or something like that. Then it's whatever they agree to. But in general, she won't be able to leave unless he agrees to, her ransom. She would have to ransom herself by giving something, unless he overlooked everything and let her go.
Yeah. And I just wanted to add, I just looked up real quick. I didn't have a chance to look. I think this is specific to Muslims, causes of divorces. And it doesn't say who, well, let me see. This is just, okay, so, but just causes of divorces. And I want you to think about these in light of Islamically, what is a valid reason to get divorced, right? So the number one reason is, uh, going back to what Mubarak said, loss of trust or respect. That was the number one response. The second highest response was abuse, mental or physical. So the mental ones, I mean, that's depending on what that really is. But physical, yeah, that's actually a violation of the rights, right? Loss of trust, that's a fuzzy one. Just because you don't trust somebody, doesn't necessarily mean it's a valid reason to get a divorce, right? Let's see. The third highest one is lack of commitment to the success of the marriage. That just means that maybe you have two different ideas of what your marriage is supposed to be. You guys are two different wavelengths. And if we're talking about who's the imam, or who's in charge of the family, or who's in charge of that success or that commitment or whatever that marriage should be, it's the husband, right? So that's not actually a valid reason to get divorced. I'll just start listing the rest because your rest are pretty close. You have compatibility, mental or physical. Not really a valid reason to get divorced. If your rights are being met, it doesn't matter if you're compatible. Intimacy issues. That could be a right. That could be something that's you could actually get a valid divorce for. Selfishness. Not a valid reason. It could be possibly, but if you're getting your rights, just because a man's stingy, but if you're getting everything you're supposed to get as far as food, maintenance, and all that, and he's selfish with the rest of his wealth, it's not a valid reason to get divorced. Family interference could be annoying, but not a valid reason. Communication, not a valid reason. Failed expectations. Now, if those expectations weren't clearly listed out in your marital agreement, not a violation of anybody's rights, not a valid reason to get a divorce. Lack of physical attraction, that could be a valid reason to get a divorce, because there's hadiths about that. Rigidity or lack of compromise.
It's a valid reason, but it would not get you off the hook to have to return the mahar.
Correct. Yes, because in the hadith he said return the mahar and then you get your divorce. Yep, you're right. So again, a lot of these things, I can keep going down the list. None of them, the only one, which is actually one of the lower ones for causes for divorce. And again, I don't know if this stats relate specifically to Muslims. I think it does, because I think the non-Muslim stats are higher. Infidelity was one of the lower range ones. So if this stuff is accurate, that means that Muslim men and women, we'll predominantly say men, are cheating less than non-Muslims. And that's not a high cause of divorce. Or, which I know a lot of situations that happen, unfortunately, where the husband does cheat, but the wife doesn't want a divorce for that. She wants a divorce for financial issues or something like that, right? So you have that.
Or if he cheats, she doesn't want a divorce. She might be mad at him, but if he gets another wife, she's out of there.
Yeah. Yep. So you have to think about these things and really consider, like, is it really? Listen, this life is short. This life is short, and you're going to waste a lot of time, as Mubarak said, chasing that dream spouse, men and women. And we have the hadith for the men, and I don't know it verbatim or the source, but where it's pretty much Rasul saying, women are like a bent rib, don't try to break them, but basically the idea of don't there's a saying, like in the workplaces, like, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Don't search for perfection. When you have something good and you just find a little issue here and there and maybe annoyance there and there, and you're like, no, I need a divorce, I need something else better, and it usually comes especially in the social media age where you're seeing everybody else's fake life and you're like, oh, I want that, I can do better, and really you actually probably have something better than what you're actually searching for. So
And it's, I mean, like I said, we don't have time today to go into it, but I'll just say most of the time, a lot of times, um, for men and women, but mostly for women, you have probably, uh, and of course there's exceptions, but you most likely have done as best as you can do. Actually, you probably have a person who's, there are better people out there probably, but for you, that's probably the best that you can do. It's not every situation. There are people who have had a terrible husband and got a much better one. You can do it. It's going to be at some expense. Like I've told people, like a woman who was married, they didn't like their husband. I said, well, you'll have to actually, you had your own husband before, but if you want to upgrade, you're probably going to have to be a second or third or fourth wife. That's what you're
yeah.
going to have to do if you want a better husband
Mhm.
than what you had. Because a lot of the people who are single in your range, they're single for a reason. No one is accepting their offers or whatever. But if you want a better husband, you're gonna have to give up something, and that's what a lot of times if a woman has a bad husband or a husband that they're better than, they they were their only wife. And then when they upgraded and that to a better man, but he had a wife already. It happens almost like most of the time that's the case when that woman upgrades. But
Yep.
for the most part, when a woman decides, I can do better than this husband, what they don't realize is because they're married now, they've been married for a while, they got a bunch of kids or whatever it might be, you might be in for a rude awakening as far as the type of range and the people that you might be able to get, especially if you're looking for a single man. And
Yeah.
Allah knows best. That's a story for another day, but it's
Yes. Yeah.
definitely that is a rude awakening that might be headed your way. So just think everything through.
Yep. Alhamdulillah. That's our show for today. Again, if you have any questions, and if you're watching this later, hit the link in the chat to submit anonymous questions. We're gonna try to be here mostly every Tuesdays for at least 30 minutes. Tuesday nights around 8:15, 8:30. We might change that time up depending on what Salat times come in. But every Tuesday night, look for us. Again, we want you guys come engage with us, ask us questions. We're here to try to help based off our experiences. We're also here to learn from you guys as well. So if you have some information, if you have some knowledge that you want to part or share with us, please let us know. Comment later as well, and we'll check those comments as well, even after the video, not the live show. And we're going to try to get everybody included in this as much as possible. Any last words, Mubarak?
No, I think that was good.
All right. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi.
Okay. So stop
Are we able
recording.
are we able to jump off or?
Yeah, I think we're